My name is Mara Collins. I'm 29 years old, and the moment I understood that my own mother had never booked me a hotel room on our family vacation, I was standing at a marble check-in counter in a beachside resort in Hilton Head, South Carolina, with a carry-on bag in my hand and a kind stranger behind the desk who was trying her best not to look directly at me. She had searched the reservation system 3 times. 3 times. Each search took about 30 seconds, and in those 30 seconds, the lobby felt like it was slowly shrinking. The kind of shrinking that happens not because the room is getting smaller, but because you are becoming more visible inside it. My mother was standing about 10 feet behind me, near a potted palm tree, scrolling her phone. Not offering help, not stepping forward, just waiting. My sister Dana was seated on a cream linen bench near the luggage rack. She had a glass of something sparkling in her hand. I still don't know where she got it that fast. And she was watching me the way people watch a performance they've already seen. Relaxed. Almost bored. Like the outcome was already settled, and the only thing left was to enjoy the final act. The desk attendant looked up at me, soft apology already forming on her face. "Miss Collins, I'm so sorry. I'm only showing 3 reservations under the family name. I don't see a 4th. I said, "Can you check again, please?" She nodded and typed. The lobby filled back in with its ambient music and the murmur of other guests and the distant sound of waves. Somewhere behind me, a child laughed. My sister set her glass down on the armrest beside her, stood up slowly, and walked toward the counter. She didn't come to help. She came to be seen helping, which is a completely different thing. She stopped just behind my left shoulder and said, loud enough for the family in line behind me to hear, "Mara, nobody made a reservation for you because nobody expected you to actually show up." She laughed then, soft, almost gentle. The way someone laughs when they want the cruelty to sound like humor. "I mean, you barely have a life. What were you going to contribute? You can barely afford the flight." The family behind me went quiet. The desk attendant looked at her keyboard. My mother, 10 feet away by the palm tree, said nothing. Not a correction, not a reprimand, not even a nervous laugh to signal that this had gone too far. Just nothing. And in that nothing, I finally understood something I should have understood long before I packed a single bag. I hadn't been invited on this trip. I had been brought along. Those are 2 entirely different things. I stood at that counter for 1 more second. Then I turned around, looked at my sister, looked at my mother, and said the only true sentence available to me. "All right, then I'll go home." My sister's face changed for just a moment, a flicker of something. Not guilt, not yet, but something like surprise. Like she had set up a stage and hadn't quite expected the other actor to simply walk off it. I picked up my carry-on, pulled the handle up, and walked toward the glass exit doors. Behind me, nobody called my name. But what none of them knew, what I didn't even fully know yet, was that someone else had been watching from a lounge chair near the corridor leading to the conference rooms. Someone who had missed nothing. Someone whose opinion about this family was about to change permanently. And by the time the automatic doors slid open and the warm South Carolina air touched my face, the version of my life they had all agreed on in my absence had already started to unravel. Before I tell you what happened after I walked out of that lobby, I want to ask you something. Has anyone in your family ever made you feel like your presence was a courtesy they were extending? Like showing up to your own family's events required a kind of quiet gratitude, a debt you were always somehow behind on? If you know that feeling, drop a comment below. Just your location and one word. I'd really like to know where you're watching from. Because what happened to me at that resort didn't start at the check-in desk. It started 4 days earlier, on a Tuesday afternoon, when I was eating lunch at my desk in my apartment in Charlotte. My mother sent a group text to the family thread. It was cheerful and detailed in the way her messages always are when she's excited about something that, in some way, reflects well on her. She included the resort name, the address, the check-in date, the schedule for holiday dinners, and a photo of the beachfront view from the resort's website. At the bottom, she listed the room assignments: one suite for her and my Aunt Renata, one room for my sister Dana and her husband Brett, one room for my cousin Tyler. My name was not on the list. I read through it twice, then a third time, the same way you reread a sentence that doesn't make sense, hoping your eyes made an error the first 2 passes. They hadn't. I typed back one question. Mom, which room am I in? She replied 45 minutes later, not with an apology, not with an explanation, with this exact sentence. The hotel is still working out some of the room details. Just plan to come. It'll be sorted. That was it. 6 years ago, I would have fired back a dozen follow-up questions. Who's sorting it? When will it be confirmed? Do I need to call them myself? Can you send me the reservation number? But that Tuesday at my desk, I just stared at her message for a while. Because here's the thing about growing up the way I did. Second in line, never quite right, always slightly less than whatever Dana happened to be at that moment. You develop a specific kind of radar. It's not dramatic, it's quiet. It's the part of your nervous system that has been trained over years of small disappointments to recognize the temperature of a lie. And my mother's message felt cold in exactly the right way. I almost didn't go. I want to be honest about that. I made coffee. I sat by the window for a long time. I thought about how I could just call and say I had a work conflict, a client emergency, a scheduling issue that came up last minute. Nobody would be particularly surprised or heartbroken. Mara canceling plans was a pattern they had decided on for me long before I had actually established it. But something made me go anyway. Partly stubbornness, partly the fact that I genuinely love my Aunt Renata and hadn't seen her since the previous Christmas. Mostly, though, I think part of me needed to know for certain. Because there is a difference between suspecting something and standing inside the proof of it. And I think some part of me was finally ready to stand inside it.
So I booked a flight, one way, because even then I wasn't sure how long I'd stay. Packed my carry-on and flew down on the morning of December 22nd. And the first thing I saw when I walked into that lobby was not my family. It was the desk attendant's face when she searched the reservation and came up empty. To understand what happened in that lobby, you have to understand something about my family. Something that took me most of my 20s to see clearly. We were not a poor family. We were not a wealthy family. We were a family that had spent 2 decades pretending to be something in between those two things, which is actually the most exhausting performance of all. My father left when I was 11. Not dramatically. No shouting, no scene, just a gradual withdrawal followed by a final one. He moved to another state, remarried, started a quieter life. We heard from him at birthdays until we stopped hearing from him at birthdays. My mother raised us on a teacher's salary and whatever she could piece together from weekend jobs, and a stubbornness about appearances that I now recognize as both impressive and quietly devastating. She had decided early on that the narrative of our family would not be one of struggle. Everything was fine. Everything was managed. Everything was, at worst, temporary. Dana fit that narrative beautifully. She was 4 years older, sharp in a calculating way, and had inherited my mother's gift for making the outside look immaculate regardless of what was happening on the inside. She married Brett Calloway at 26, a financial consultant, stable income, good teeth. The kind of man who looks trustworthy in a family photo. My mother spoke about Dana's wedding the way some people speak about a national holiday. Something to be celebrated, referenced, and brought up in conversation at every opportunity. I, on the other hand, went a different direction. Not on purpose, not out of rebellion. I just never learned how to want the things that were supposed to satisfy me. I studied graphic design in college, took an internship that turned into a job that I left after 2 years because the company was quietly collapsing and the creative director was taking credit for everyone else's work. I freelanced for a while. Then I built a small brand identity studio out of my apartment. Just me, a reliable laptop, a good client list, and the kind of slow-building confidence that comes from solving real problems for real people. By the time I was 27, I was making a living. Not a flashy living. Not the kind that generated social media posts or impressed people at dinner tables. But a real one. Client contracts, consistent income, a savings account I added to monthly, a lease I paid on time. My mother did not understand this, not because she wasn't intelligent, but because in her mental model of success, anything that didn't come with a title, a salary from a named company, a husband, and a mortgage was essentially failure wearing a costume. And Dana had made sure to reinforce that model at every opportunity. Mara is still figuring things out. That's how Dana described me to extended family. Not cruelly, always. Sometimes with an almost fond smile, like you'd smile at a child who was taking a bit longer than the others. Sometimes more directly. Mara's always been a little too independent for her own good. Or the version I heard once through a thin hotel wall at a different family event. I just think Mara needs to grow up and stop pretending a few freelance clients is an actual career. The words changed. The message stayed exactly the same. You are behind. You are less. You are the story we tell to make ourselves feel further ahead. And for years, I carried that like luggage I had forgotten was optional. The trip to Hilton Head had been organized by my Aunt Renata, technically. She was my mother's older sister. Warm, wry, more financially comfortable than she ever made a point of saying. She had booked the resort and coordinated the logistics, but she'd handed the room assignments over to my mother to manage. Which is, I think, where the plan was made. Not a plan out of malice, perhaps. I've had time to think about that. It might have started as something smaller. An oversight allowed to become a decision. A conversation between my mother and Dana about whether Mara even needed her own room if she wasn't going to contribute much anyway. A quiet consensus that if I came, I'd figure it out. And if it was a little uncomfortable, well. A little discomfort had always been what they thought I needed. What they didn't account for was my aunt. Let me take you back to the lobby, because I want to be precise about it. Not to dwell, not to perform the pain, but because the details matter. The details are where the truth lives. I arrived at the resort at 12:40 in the afternoon. The lobby was bright, all pale wood and seafoam tile and warm winter light coming through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. The kind of place designed to make you exhale. I had never stayed anywhere like it. My mother was already there with Dana and Brett. Aunt Renata was somewhere upstairs, I was told. She'd checked in early. My mother greeted me the way she'd been greeting me for years. A quick hug, perfunctory, her eyes already moving past me to check whether anyone nearby had noticed she looked well-dressed for her age. She asked if my flight was fine. I said it was. She nodded and turned back to her conversation. Dana said hello with the specific kind of warmth that has a trapdoor in it. Friendly enough to be deniable. Measured enough to communicate that she was doing me a courtesy by acknowledging me at all. Brett shook my hand. He was a man who had married into a dynamic he'd never fully questioned, which made him complicit without ever being original. I went to the front desk. You already know what happened next. The system search, the blank result, the kind desk attendant who checked 3 times. But what I haven't told you yet is what it felt like to stand there in that silence while my family watched. It felt like being in a waiting room and suddenly understanding that the appointment was never real. All that driving to get here, all that deciding to come, all that quiet overriding of my own instincts. And now this, a counter, a kind stranger, a reservation that didn't exist, and my own mother standing 10 feet away pretending to read something on her phone. When Dana walked over and said what she said, that nobody made a reservation for me because nobody expected me to show up, that I barely had a life, that I could barely afford the flight. The words didn't land the way she probably expected them to. They didn't make me cry. They didn't make me argue. They made me still. Not the still of numbness, the still of clarity. The kind of clear that comes when something finally makes complete sense. She had said the quiet part out loud. That was all. She had just narrated the story they'd all been running for years. The story in which I was the inconvenience, the cautionary tale, the one who showed up to things she didn't quite belong to. The family behind me at the desk shuffled awkwardly, a young couple with 2 kids. The mother had her hand on the older child's shoulder and was looking very hard at a point somewhere above my head. The desk attendant had gone very still, the way service professionals do when they're witnessing something they have no protocol for. My mother said nothing. I want to say that again, because it's the part that mattered most. My mother said nothing. Not, Dana, that's enough. Not, let's sort this out, I'm sorry for the confusion. Not even a deflection, a subject change, a reaching for her purse to see about getting a room. She scrolled her phone, and in her silence was the full answer to every question I had ever half-asked over the years. Am I an afterthought? Yes. Has the warmth I remember from childhood been replaced with something colder? Yes. Is this a mistake? Or is this what I am to them? It is what you are to them. I had my answer, and so I gave my reply. All right, then I'll go home. Dana blinked. Mara. But I was already turning, already pulling up the handle of my carry-on, already walking toward the glass doors and the warm December air on the other side. Nobody followed. Nobody called out. But just before I pushed through the doors, I heard something from the corridor to my left. A door. Soft footsteps. My aunt's voice. Quiet but carrying. Mara, wait. Aunt Renata was 61 years old, and she moved through the world with the particular authority of a woman who had stopped apologizing for taking up space sometime in her early 40s and never looked back. She had a coffee cup in her hand and reading glasses pushed up on her head. She'd been in a small business lounge just off the main corridor, working through emails. She came around the corner and read the entire scene in about 3 seconds. The way I was standing, the way my mother was standing, the desk attendant's expression, Dana's performance posture. She set her coffee cup on the nearest flat surface and looked at me. Tell me what happened. I told her. Calmly. I didn't dress it up. I didn't strip it down. I just said, the room wasn't booked. Dana said what she said, and I was leaving. Aunt Renata listened without interrupting. She had a way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying was being taken seriously in real time, not processed and filed away for later. When I finished, she turned and looked at my mother. My mother had finally put her phone down. Patricia, my aunt said. Just that, just my mother's name, but in a tone that carried 20 years of knowing someone and choosing, finally, to stop being diplomatic. My mother said, She's overreacting. There was a mix-up. Was there? Aunt Renata asked. Silence.
Dana started to say something. My aunt raised one hand, not aggressively, but with the finality of someone who had decided they were done hearing certain voices for the moment. She turned back to me. I organized this trip. I planned this trip. If anyone is responsible for the guest list and the reservations, it's me. And I'm telling you right now, you are a guest on this trip. You were always meant to be a guest on this trip, and the fact that a room was not booked under your name is something I will deal with. Today. She walked to the front desk. In 12 minutes, I counted, she had arranged a room for me. Not a converted broom closet, not a rollaway in someone else's space. A room on the same floor as everyone else, at her expense, with an apology from her to the desk attendant for any confusion caused. Then she turned to me and said, quietly so only I could hear, I owe you a conversation. Not now. Tonight. Before dinner. Come find me. I nodded. She picked up her coffee, went back to the business lounge, and that was that. My mother and Dana stood in the lobby watching this happen. Neither of them said a word. Not a thank you to Renata, not an apology to me. Just a kind of recalibration, a quiet repositioning. I went upstairs to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while and looked at the ocean through the window. And for the first time since I'd gotten off the plane, I breathed normally. I knocked on my aunt's door at 6 that evening, just as the sky outside was turning the kind of deep orange that makes coastlines look like paintings. She had poured 2 glasses of wine and set them on the small table by the window. She gestured to the chair across from her and waited until I was settled before she spoke. What she told me in the next 30 minutes rearranged a number of things I had accepted as fixed. She had known about the room situation before I arrived. Not the full plan, if there had been a plan. But she had asked my mother, 2 days before we left, whether all the reservations were confirmed. My mother had said yes. And something in the way she said it had made Renata check the system herself that morning. She had found 3 rooms, not 4. She had texted my mother immediately. There's no room for Mara. My mother had replied, she might not even come. You know how she is. Renata showed me the message on her phone. I looked at it for a long time. You know how she is. Not, we need to add her. Not, let me call the hotel. Just, you know how she is. As if my potential absence was a known quantity. As if I was so unlikely to actually show up that the whole logistical problem might solve itself. I should have pushed harder, Renata said. I thought it was an oversight. I should have known better. I told her she didn't owe me an apology. She had done more in 12 minutes downstairs than my own mother had done in 4 days. She shook her head. This has been going on too long. The way they talk about you, the way Dana talks about your work, your apartment, your choices. I've let it go because I convinced myself it wasn't my place. But today in that lobby, she stopped, set her wine down. Today was not a mix-up, Mara. You know that. I said I knew. And your mother knew you were going to walk into that lobby and find nothing. I said I knew that too. She asked me what I was going to do. I thought about it. I said, I'm going to go to dinner tomorrow night, and I'm not going to pretend today didn't happen, but I'm not going to make a scene either. Renata looked at me for a moment. Then she said something I wrote down later in my phone so I wouldn't lose it. You've been making yourself smaller for so long that the people in this family have mistaken your restraint for weakness. Let them see what they've been underestimating. Not loudly, just let them see it. We sat there a while longer, watching the water turn dark. When I went back to my room that night, I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I came downstairs for breakfast and found my family at a table in the resort restaurant. Brett was reading something on his phone. My mother was in a conversation with Dana about someone in the neighborhood back home. Dana had fresh coffee and a practiced ease, the kind that looked like confidence but was actually performance maintenance. I got a plate from the breakfast buffet, sat down, said good morning, and ate my meal. Nobody mentioned the lobby. Nobody mentioned the room. Nobody said anything that acknowledged, even obliquely, that the previous day had happened. This is a specific strategy that families like mine rely on: the silent reset. The communal agreement to pretend the temperature is different than it is. It works when everyone participates. I didn't participate. I wasn't cold. I wasn't dramatic. I answered questions when I was asked them. I passed the orange juice. I made a comment about the weather. But I didn't ease things. I didn't smooth the air. I didn't perform the graciousness that would have allowed them to relax back into their comfortable dynamic. I just was. Fully present, entirely myself, not angry, not wounded, not trying. And I noticed something that bothered Dana more than tears would have. She kept glancing at me, small looks, checking whether I was about to do something, say something, confront something. My stillness seemed to unsettle her in a way that defensiveness never could have. My mother was more careful. She tried once, around mid-morning when we were briefly alone near the coffee station. About yesterday, she started. I looked at her. She paused, like she'd been expecting me to jump in and fill the space. I didn't. The hotel had a billing issue, she said. It got confused, Mom, I said, calmly. Renata showed me the text you sent her. A silence. I'm not going to argue with you about it, I continued. I'm here for the holiday. I'd like to have a decent few days. But I also need you to know that I'm not going to pretend I didn't understand exactly what happened. She looked away, out toward the pool where Brett was setting up loungers. You've always been so sensitive, she said finally. I didn't answer that, because there was no real answer to give, not one that would land. Instead, I said, I'll see you at dinner tonight, and I walked away. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't even an argument. But something in the conversation had shifted in a way I could feel in my spine. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I hadn't tried to convince her I was worth being treated well. I had simply stated that I knew the truth, and then I had left. The holiday dinner was held in a private dining room off the main restaurant. Long table, candles, white tablecloth, the kind of setting that makes everything feel more significant. My aunt had arranged it beautifully. Little cards with names, a small arrangement of winter flowers in the center, the sound of the ocean somewhere beyond the windows. We were 7 around the table: my mother, Dana, Brett, my cousin Tyler, Aunt Renata, her longtime partner Gerald, and me. Dinner began the way family dinners always begin when something unresolved is sitting in the room. Deliberately cheerful, willfully normal. Everyone complimenting the food, the view, the resort's efficiency. Dana talked at length about a renovation she and Brett were planning, expanding the kitchen, refinishing the floors, adding a new deck. She talked about it with the fluency of someone who has rehearsed the details until they became part of her identity. This is who we are. This is what we have. Look and confirm us. My mother asked Gerald about his retirement plans. Gerald answered thoughtfully. Gerald was a kind man who had long since figured out the emotional weather of this particular family and navigated it by asking questions and answering carefully. I ate and participated at a normal volume. Then, about halfway through the main course, my aunt set down her fork, touched a napkin to her mouth, and looked around the table. "I want to say something," she said, "while we're all here." The table adjusted to her. She had that quality. Rooms did. "I've been coming to family dinners for 30 years," she said. "I've watched this family grow up, fall apart, repair, and grow up again. I've tried, most of the time, to stay out of the sharper dynamics and focus on what we shared." She paused. "Yesterday, I watched something happen in a lobby downstairs that I am not going to stay quiet about." Dana stiffened. My mother picked up her water glass. "Mara came to this trip in good faith," Renata continued. "A trip I organized. A trip she was told she was invited to. And when she arrived, there was no room for her. Now, I want to be fair. I don't know every conversation that led to that. What I do know is what I heard in that lobby, and what I know is that I showed Dana and Patricia a message about that missing reservation 2 days before we left. A message that was not acted on." Brett was very still. Tyler was looking at the table. "More than the logistics," Renata said, "I want to talk about what was said, because logistics can be accidents. Words are not accidents." She looked at Dana directly. Dana met her gaze and attempted a deflection. "Aunt Renata, I was frustrated. I didn't mean—" "Dana?" My aunt's voice didn't rise. It just became more precise, the way a light becomes more useful when it's focused. "I heard what you said to your sister in front of hotel staff and strangers. I need you to hear, from me, that there is no version of frustrated that justifies that." Brett spoke then, quietly. "With respect, Renata, this feels like something the family should handle privately?" She turned to him. "Yesterday wasn't private. It was public and deliberate." The table was very quiet. Then my aunt did something I hadn't anticipated. She looked at me. "I owe you a direct apology," she said, "because I organized this trip. I trusted the coordination to people I shouldn't have trusted with that particular responsibility. You walked into a room that was supposed to welcome you and found evidence that you'd been set up to feel like you didn't belong. That happened on my watch, and I'm sorry." I looked at her. I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. She nodded, then she turned back to the table. "I want to say one more thing, and I want everyone at this table to hear it because I will not be repeating it." She straightened. "I have supported this family in a number of ways over the years. Financially, yes, in some instances. Practically, in others. I have done that because I love this family and because I believe in the value of family ties, even when they're frayed. She looked at my mother. But I will not finance dynamics that leave one person feeling like a charity case while others use borrowed comfort as a reason to feel superior. The air in the room changed temperature. I have put some things on pause while I think about how I want to proceed, she said. That includes the quarterly contribution I make to your household account, Patricia, which I have been making since 2019. It includes the education fund assistance I extended for Dana's children last year. She paused. Not permanently. I'm not a punishing person. But until I understand what I am contributing to and whether it's contributing to something I recognize as decent, I'm pausing. Dana's face had gone somewhere between white and something harder to name. Brett's jaw tightened. My mother whispered, "Renata, This is long overdue," my aunt said. "I think you know that." She picked up her fork, took a calm bite of her food, and the dinner continued. Nobody touched dessert. I flew back to Charlotte 2 days later. By the time I landed, my phone had 9 missed calls and a collection of texts that all said different versions of the same thing. Fix this. Tell her she went too far. This is your fault. My mother's messages swung between accusation and appeal. First, you should have said something to calm things down. Then, do you realize what this means for our situation? Then, the hardest to read, the one I kept coming back to. I'm your mother. I should come first with you. I sat with that last one for a long time, because some part of me, the part that still remembered being 11 and watching my father's car pull out of the driveway for the last time, still wanted to reply, I know you should. I wanted you to. But wanting a thing and receiving it are different experiences, and I had spent too many years being governed by the wanting. Dana's message was more revealing than anything else she could have said. It read, I honestly cannot believe you just sat there and let this happen to us, after everything we've included you in. Everything we've included you in. I read it twice. The framing of it. The implication that my presence in my own family was a courtesy extended by the people who held the real membership. I didn't respond to that message. I didn't respond to most of them. Not out of revenge, not because I was enjoying the silence, but because I had looked at the list of things I was being asked to do. Smooth it over, intervene, reassure, reduce the consequences, and recognized that every single one of those things required me to absorb damage that I had not caused. I had learned a long time ago how to be the shock absorber in this family, how to compress myself to reduce friction, how to take up less room, have lower expectations, perform gratitude for invitations that should have been unconditional. I was done with that job. Over the following weeks, information came to me in pieces. My cousin Tyler called me in January. He was in his mid-20s and mostly stayed out of the family's sharper politics, but he heard things and had always been honest with me in a way the others weren't. He told me that my mother and Renata had a long phone call in early January that had not gone particularly well. That Renata had made clear she wasn't simply making a point for symbolic purposes. That the quarterly deposit, which I hadn't known about until the dinner, had been a meaningful part of my mother's monthly structure. He told me that Dana and Brett had apparently been operating with more financial stretch than their lifestyle suggested. The renovation plans they'd discussed at dinner had not yet begun, and from what Tyler could piece together, there was a gap between the project deposit they'd committed to a contractor and what they actually had available. My aunt's education fund contribution had been informal, no legal contract, and the expectation of its continuation had been built into a mental budget. Tyler said, "I think they forgot that informal support is the first thing to disappear." I asked him how he knew all this. He said Dana had called him 3 times in 2 weeks, which was 3 times more than she usually called him in a year. My mother's messages had changed in tone by February. Less accusatory, more tired. She mentioned, once, that she was looking at her financial situation more carefully. She mentioned that she might need to downsize from the apartment she'd moved into after my father left, the one that had always been a size or two bigger than her teaching income strictly supported, the one that had always been, I now understood, partially backstopped by my aunt's quiet generosity. I listened to her voicemails. I replied when she asked simple questions. I didn't offer to solve anything, because I hadn't caused anything. One night in February, I was making dinner when Dana called. I looked at her name on the screen for the full length of a ring cycle. Then I picked up. "I'm not calling to argue," she said immediately, which meant she had considered it. "Okay," I said. A silence. Then, "I need you to understand that I'm under a lot of pressure right now." "I know," I said. "Brett and I are... It's complicated. The contractor thing is a mess, and Mom is... She's not doing great. And I know you think this is what I deserve, Dana." I stopped her, not unkindly. "I don't think this is what you deserve. I think this is what happens when you build a life on assumptions." She was quiet. "I'm not glad you're stressed," I said. "But I also can't pretend that what happened in Hilton Head was a small thing. You said what you said in front of strangers. You made sure they could hear." "I know," she said. Her voice was different. Not the voice she'd used at the resort, the sharp performing voice. Something quieter. "I know." We stayed on the line for a moment in silence. "I'm not going to ask Aunt Renata to change her mind," I said. "That's not something I have or want that kind of influence over. But I do want you to hear me say that whatever happens between you and her is between you and her. I'm not the reason she made the choice she made." "I know that too," Dana said, quietly. "Okay," I said. We hung up a few minutes later. I don't know exactly what I expected to feel. What I actually felt was something closer to relief. Not the relief of winning, the relief of a conversation that had, for once, been real. Spring came to Charlotte early that year. By March, the trees along my street were already starting. I started taking longer walks in the evening, something I hadn't done regularly since I moved to the city. Something about having more room in my head, fewer things I was carrying for other people, made space for the kind of quiet contentment that doesn't announce itself. My client work had been going well, better than well. I'd taken on 2 new projects in January, a small product company that needed a complete brand rebuild, and a nonprofit that had been working with clip art level design for a decade and was finally ready to look like what they were. The work was good, challenging in the specific way I loved, where the problem requires you to understand something about people before you understand anything about aesthetics. I was not rich. I want to be clear about that. I was comfortable in a way that felt earned, not borrowed, not dependent on someone else's willingness to keep funding the version of life I was performing. When I paid my rent, I didn't check another account to cover it. When I bought groceries, I bought what I wanted. When I planned a trip, I booked a room. One Sunday in March, I called my aunt. We talked for almost an hour, mostly about nothing urgent: her garden, a book she'd finished, Gerald's retirement adjustment, a new restaurant near her house that she said I had to try when I visited. Near the end, I said, "I've been thinking about Hilton Head." "So have I," she said. "I've been thinking that I spent a lot of years waiting for them to see me clearly, and that it took walking out of a lobby for me to stop waiting." A quiet on the line. "Waiting is expensive," she said. "It costs more than most people calculate." "Yeah," I said. I think I was paying a toll I couldn't see. She asked about my work. She asked whether I was sleeping. She asked, in her direct way, whether I was happy. I thought about it honestly before I answered. "I'm getting there," I said. "I think I'm actually getting there." She said that was the right direction. A text came from my mother in late March. Not an apology, not exactly, but something in the neighborhood of one. She wrote that she'd been thinking about the past few months, that she knew things had been difficult, that she thought, sometimes, that she had made choices in how she managed the family that she wished she'd made differently. She didn't say what choices. She didn't specify anything.
She didn't name the lobby, or the text she'd sent Renata, or the silence while Dana performed. But it was more than I'd gotten before. I sat with it for a few days. Then I wrote back, "I appreciate you saying that. I think there's more to say, but I'm glad you're thinking about it." So am I. That was the beginning of a slower thing. Not a resolution, not a repair, just a beginning. The first honest sentence in a long conversation that would take a long time to have, which was, I thought, more realistic than what I might have wanted when I was younger. When I was younger, I wanted the grand moment, the full apology, the acknowledgement delivered publicly, with the same witnesses as the wound. But grief and repair don't usually work that way. They happen in small transactions, in texts that are slightly more honest than the ones before, in phone calls where someone stumbles toward accountability without quite reaching it and tries again later. I could wait for that. I was learning how to wait for things that were actually worth waiting for and let go of everything else. My carry-on is blue. It's a mid-range brand, nothing special. Got it on sale 3 years ago, and it's been on 11 trips since. There's a small scuff on the bottom right corner from when I caught it on a curb in Nashville. I've thought about replacing it. Haven't gotten around to it. The last time I wheeled it through a hotel lobby, a family member told me that I wasn't worth the room. Next time I take it somewhere, I'll be going because I decided to. Staying where I booked, eating where I choose, present in exactly the way I want to be. That, more than anything else, is what that Hilton Head trip gave me. Not the satisfaction of watching someone else's overconfidence collapse, though I won't pretend that didn't arrive too. Not the vindication of someone else finally saying what I'd needed to hear said out loud, though my aunt's words at that dinner table are ones I've replayed on difficult days. What that trip gave me was clarity. There is a particular kind of family dynamic, and I think many of you watching this already know it, where one person is cast as the lesser one, the less successful one, the less settled one, the one who hasn't figured it out yet. And in that dynamic, the casting isn't random. It serves a purpose. As long as there is a lesser version, everyone else gets to feel more complete by comparison. The thing about that role is that it requires your participation, not your consent. They don't ask for that. But your participation, your willingness to keep showing up as the lesser version, to keep taking the small slights, to keep treating invitations as privileges rather than entitlements, to keep making yourself easier to dismiss so the structure holds. The moment you stop, something happens. And it's not always graceful. It's not always clean. In my case, it happened in a hotel lobby with my carry-on in my hand and a desk attendant who had searched 3 times and found nothing. But the moment you stop is the moment the entire arrangement has to find a new foundation. And a foundation built on illusion, on borrowed money and borrowed superiority and borrowed ease, does not survive its first encounter with reality. Here is what I believe, having lived this. A family that measures your worth by the size of your apartment, the name of your employer, the person you married, or the lifestyle you project. That family is not measuring your worth. They are measuring their own fear. They are assessing how much of their self-image is secured by your relative smallness, and you cannot earn your way out of that equation. You cannot achieve enough, or apologize enough, or accommodate enough to change it. The only thing that changes it is the willingness to simply be what you are, without performing smallness for their comfort, and to walk out of lobbies that were designed to make you feel like you don't belong. The hardest part is that it costs something. I won't lie to you about that. It costs the fantasy of the family you wished you had. It costs the comfortable version of the relationship where everyone agrees to keep things pleasant by keeping things unexamined. It costs the particular comfort of being the person who absorbs difficulty without complaint, because at least then you're needed, even if you're not valued. But what you gain is something they can't take from you: a room you booked, a trip you planned, a life that is yours all the way down. That's not a dramatic ending. It's not a confrontation scene or a standing ovation or a moment where the music swells and everyone finally understands your value. It's quieter than that. It's sitting at your desk on a Tuesday in March, paying your bills from money you earned, planning a trip to somewhere you actually want to go, and realizing that the voice in your head saying you don't quite belong here has gotten noticeably quieter, and that the voice you've been listening to all along, the one that sounded so certain, so authoritative, so permanent, was never telling you anything true. It was just repeating what someone else needed you to believe. You don't have to believe it anymore. If this story connected with you in some way, if any part of it felt like something you've lived or are still living, leave a comment. Tell me what resonated. Tell me where you are in it. I read them. I think about them. And if you know someone who needs to hear that walking out of a lobby isn't failure, that sometimes it's the first honest thing you've done in years, share this with them. Take care of yourselves. I'll be back soon.